Intersectionality, gender, and advertising. I want to start off by talking about the difference between sex and gender because sometimes the two are often conflated with one another and the terms are very similar. Some people use them interchangeably, but there's a very much distinction between the two. Judith Butler was really the academic who started to talk about the difference of sex and gender, but also the performance of gender and how society and patriarchy and heteronormativity really influenced us through the social construction of gender, how to perform these traditional gender roles. Now, when we think about sex, sex is something that is biologically assigned, right? You are born and it is assigned in this very traditional heteronormative dichotomous way as male or female, right? And it's usually determined by the sexual organs that you are born with, although some people are born as intersex with both sex organs, and then the parents choose which sex organs they want to keep and which they don't. And then they assign their children a gender or a sex at birth. Gender, however, is a social cultural construct. It is a meaning that represents the sexed body and what that sexed body assumes. What is the gender that you assume? Gender cannot said to follow from sex in any one sort of way. It's a very fluid construction. It is something that is culturally bound, but also culturally fluid. Gender is a performance, something we do or act out over and over again every day in our lives, and our gender identity is usually never fixed. And when I say it's never fixed, it's because social and cultural shifts dictate how gender should be performed, what kinds of clothes we should wear, what kind of roles we should have, how we should speak, who we should marry, who we should be with. All these different things are always in flux. So gender is something that is socially constructed and is fluid. So knowing that, we then start to look at what the first module really focuses on, which is the idea of women, both in terms of cisgender and transgender women, people who identify themselves as the gender women. The United Nations released a Decade of Women report that covered the presence of women or the absence of women in all media-related activities from 1976 to 1985. Women were largely ignored by the serious media. Usually when we say serious media, the serious media is what was used by the authors in this piece. But we talk about news. News is usually what we think about as serious media. Some people call it hard media or hard news. The report also found that when women were included in media content, their experiences and images were often stereotyped or distorted. Most of the time, they were portrayed in very patriarchal, stereotyped gendered roles, or they were hypersexualized. Women were also blocked from entry into media professions and thereby unable to affect production of content in regard to gender. Other studies have come out to show that when women are in positions of authority or positions of power or supervision in media organizations, there tends to be more inclusion of women in terms of employees, but also content that is related to women that is a little bit more unbiased and unsexualized or unobjectified as well. When we think about media, we look at creating this type of analysis, and we talked about this in a couple of lectures ago, right? There's different types of qualitative analysis that we can do, textual analysis, discourse analysis, and we look at this from a four-part academic critique, and this is essential because what you're going to be doing at the end of the semester is a critique on a media program, and you're going to be using this four-part academic critique right here. Absence, representation, employment, production, and consumption. These are usually the four things that we look at in terms of any type of gender or sexual orientation or identities in media. So the absence, are these groups of people even present in the media that we're consuming? Representation, how are these groups of people being represented or misrepresented? And then employment and production, are this specific group of people being included in the actual production of the film? Are they decision makers, or not just film, right? It could be television, music, or anything of that sort. But are they making decisions about the content, about the production, about the dissemination, about who is cast and not cast? And then also the consumption, right? This is really targeted at the audience. who is consuming this media and how is the content in the media affecting the audience. Now, for this module, we're focusing on women, but this four-part academic critique can really focus on any type of identity. So we're really going to be looking at how women are absent from certain forms of media, how they're being represented or misrepresented, where do they look at in terms of employment or production or decision making in the media content, and then when women are the audience, how are they being affected by the content that is being displayed or depicted in these different types of media representations. So those are the four parts that we're going to look at. Looking at it a little bit more specifically in terms of representation and absence, this is mainly where we're going to focus on in terms of this class for the summer. You already know it's a very fast-paced type of summer course, and so when we look at the different types of films and streaming media and advertisements, I really want you to focus on these two things broadly: representation and absence, right? So in terms of representation, we really look at stereotypes. How are women being presented in typical stereotypes? Usually one of the major big stereotypes is the relationship of women to patriarchy and hegemonic masculinity. So how are they being displayed in terms of the patriarchy, right? Are they being showed as homemakers, as people who have to produce children? What is their typical stereotype gender roles? And then in relation to hegemonic masculinity, we're really talking about sexualization and objectification of the women, right? Usually we see them as hypersexualized, pornographic, obsequious, servient, these types of things. And then also, what is the relationship in terms of race, ethnicity, class, and sexual orientation, right? Because women are more than just their gender, right? And so we need to think about it in terms of intersectionality. Absence as well, right? And this is a term called symbolic annihilation. And this term really talks about how the absence of any type of group of people, specific identities, are purposely left out. They're annihilated from media in order for people not to think about them, people not to pay attention to them, or for people to be able to control the way in which the narrative is being shaped around this group of people, right? Again, these issues of power. So symbolic annihilation means the purposeful absence of a group of people, here it would be women, in order for the elite to control the narrative on them and not for women to be able to control their own narrative. And then, of course, we talk about patriarchy, mother, married, desired, or undesired by men. When we talk about issues of patriarchy and heteronormativity, I really do want to make something clear. The issue is not that women should not be portrayed in these different types of activities, that women should never be portrayed as mothers or women should never be portrayed as wives. The object of this academic inquiry, when we talk about issues of feminism and feminist theory, is that women should have a choice. There should be many different types of depictions, right? So that being a mother isn't the only choice for a woman. Being married and subservient to men isn't the only choice. There's nothing wrong with making the choice to be those things. It's the fact that sometimes society tells us that there's no other choice. Women have to be women and be in these specific traditional gendered roles. Men have to be in these specific traditional gendered roles, and that's the only options. That's where patriarchy comes into play and where it can be bad, right? And then also intersectional women. Is there an absence of different types of intersections of women? So if we say, oh, women are included in this film, but are there Black women? Are there women that are Native American? Are there women that are disabled? Are there women that are also lesbians or bisexual or gender fluid, right? These are things that we're going to talk about. So some really quick points to kind of just think about in terms of the next couple of things that we're going to be doing in terms of looking at media, right, is trying to really understand from a social perspective what we're looking at in terms of these mediated images, which could be pictures, they could be advertisements, they could be films or movies or documentaries, right? Media texts never simply mirror or reflect reality, but instead they construct these hegemonic definitions of what should be accepted as reality. And as time progresses, these different types of representations tend to change. In the 1950s, when we had these depictions of married couples, it was, of course, this man and woman who lived together, but we never saw them sleeping in the same bed together. Sometimes some of these really, really early shows showed men and women sleeping in separate beds, and they only had sex in terms of procreation, and then they never really talked about sex or sex acts in the show itself. Fast forward now to 2018, we really see a different depiction of what a couple looks like, right? And it's necessarily not a man and a woman. It could be a man and a man, a woman and a woman, maybe three or four different people having this different type of partnership, right? Definitions also appear to be inevitable, real, and commonsensical, but are not actually so, right? When we say the word, oh, be a woman or be a lady, what does that actually imply? It's not really as simplistic as it sounds because, one, there's a lot of stereotypes and gender roles there that go along with that, but what is actually happening in society, right? Remember, we talked about phenomenology earlier? That's the lived experiences of people, and we really want to get to that in terms of really understanding socially and culturally how women and other groups are being presented in the media. Although anchored in issues that exist within the social realm, these definitions are constructs that represent and validate only certain discourses over other. So again, back to hegemony, it's all about power. Who is in control of these narratives? And are these narratives really being constructed from a very elitist heteronormative position, right? So women should act in certain ways. Women's gender roles should be certain things. Sometimes the people that are in control of power have a lot to do with patriarchy, but also with religion, right? So we have to keep those things when we're considering, and then also consider time and space and where the media is being produced and where it's being disseminated in order to really get a bigger and better social understanding of the issue. The dominant discourses are unlikely to support the cause of truly empowering a historically disenfranchised group such as women. So again, we look at media historically being produced and presented from a very male perspective, a white, straight, cisgender male perspective. And so now new media is having a way of getting women involved in the production and dissemination and also in the content creation of this media so that the characters can be more robust, more representational, more intersectional, and depict women in a more fully holistic type of way. When we think about advertising, advertising is one of the quickest ways for us to kind of really get an idea of how society and media really depict women. Advertising has a very short window of attention span for the consumers, right? Usually commercials are 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, or 60 seconds if they're radio or television. And then, of course, when we have different types of print, you're only limited to the space of that print. So here's an example of some covers of magazines, GQ magazines. As you can tell from the top row, when they are trying to advertise towards men, well, the whole magazine is advertised towards men. But when they're really looking and highlighting different types of male actors on the covers, the males are always shown as professional, fully clothed, dressed in ties and suits, hair very much combed, chiseled, very well groomed. But the women, as you can see on the bottom, when they're placed on the covers of GQ, they are very hypersexualized. They are scantily clothed, sometimes not clothed at all. They are positioned in very sexual types of poses. And this is done purposefully, right? To get the attention of the men who are buying this magazine for them to pick it up and open the pages and see what else, what other kind of juicy details they can find within the pages of GQ magazine. But it's not just males magazines either. Here is Olivia Pope, right? Or Kerry Washington. She played Olivia Pope. So when she came out in Scandal as Olivia Pope, Kerry Washington really blew up all over the place, and everybody wanted her to be on the cover of their magazines, from Marie Claire to Vanity Fair to Essence and Women's Health. But as you can see here, even though we have Kerry Washington posing on these different covers, she is still presented in a somewhat of a sexual types of high-end luxury items using sexual violence as a way to sell their products as well too. And then down here in the bottom, Dolce and Gabbana, Tom Ford, and Heineken even really using women in a very sexualized manner. In fact, if you look here at the Tom Ford advertisement, much like some of the other advertisements, the woman doesn't even have an identity. All you see is her body part, her mouth is open, her breast. You can't even see her eyes. You don't even know what this woman looks like. The only parts that are being used for advertisement are the parts that sexualize and objectify her. So again, I want you to think about these two terms going forward when we're looking at the different types of media and you're writing your reflections and you're writing your discussion posts. Again, symbolic annihilation. A reference for this is the symbolic annihilation of women by Gail Tuchman, 1978. She really came up and coined this phrase. And again, it's the purposeful exclusion of a group of people, here specifically women, in order for them to be controlled, or the narrative about them to be controlled by the elite. And then symbolic representation, ways in which American values and ideals are embedded in the portrayal of family in the media, again referring to patriarchy and heteronormativity. Media, of course, are thought to convey to audiences what types of roles and behaviors are most approved of and valued in society. And then, of course, media as being agents of socialization. So the way in which we construct socially the idea of gender, how it should be performed, and then all the implications that come along with that, right?